start the going live process, because sometimes it takes a few minutes to get going. Live on Facebook. Okay, I'm about to go live.
I'm sorry, I do have 2 kitty cats, so.
Okay, it's okay. We are all the way real life here. Like, we don't, whatever happens, happens. Kids may walk in the scene.
We've
Like,
seen that happen, on the Zoom.
yeah, we don't worry about it. So Lisa, we should be live now. If you're able to go into the live page and share in the private group, that would be great. Let me know if you have any issues.
It's on.
Okay, wonderful. So I will just get started in a few minutes. I just want to make sure everything is going on my end. Yes, I see now that we are live. So wonderful. Good morning, everyone. And thank you so much for joining us. If you're seeing this live stream, please, please, please share it with your friends, share it with your network, share it on your personal page, because this is going to be a very interesting conversation this morning. I'm Dipelsha Magruder, the founder of Moms of Black Boys United. And first, before we get into the conversation, I just want to share a few personal and organizational updates. The first thing I would like to share is that I personally had an amazing week and somewhat an unexpected week. It was a very long week. Going into the end of the year, it's always a busy time at work and with school and everything going on. So I was just exhausted, and I feel like I told a coworker, I feel like I'm kind of dragging myself in the mud to the end of the year, like on the finish line, like by hand. So really exhausting week. But about a week ago, I was notified that I was selected for the Route 100 list. And if you know the Route, it's an online digital news site that highlights African-American voices, perspectives, issues. And I've long time been a fan and reader of the Route. And actually, the first time I wrote about Mob United, it was an op-ed on theroot.com. That was the very first time, just days after starting the Facebook group, that I went on and wrote about this experience that I was having. And that was kind of coincidental because that was almost 7 years ago, but they notified me that I was chosen for the Route 100, which is a list of 100 of the most influential African Americans of the year. And they invited me to attend an award ceremony Thursday night at the Apollo Theater. They've been doing this list for about 13 years, but it's always been a small private event, invitation only. But this year, for the first time, they hosted a public event at the Apollo Theater here in New York. And, again, I'm just going through my week. I didn't even think I could make it. I had a very hard conflict. I told them I couldn't make it. I identified someone else to accept on my behalf. And that was that. And then the day before, I found out I could get out of the conflict, and then told them I could make it. And they're like, okay, we need a speech. So this is like the night before, I have to write like a 5-minute speech that they put in the teleprompter. So I, banged out this speech, sent it to them, dragged myself there, figured out what to wear. And when I got there, I found out that out of the 100 people, of course, not all of them showed up because there's people on the list like Michelle Obama and lots of famous people. I'm actually number 97, right above Meghan Markle. That was the part I found most amusing, but right, so random, right? But I found out when I got there that I was one of only 5 people who were selected to speak. So it's good I showed up. And VP Kamala Harris, our soror, Pam, I'll introduce you in a minute, spoke via video. She submitted like a video acceptance speech. And then the other speakers were Questlove, The Roots, Chloe Bailey, who is a very hot singing artist right now, and a woman, I can't remember how to pronounce her name, but this very, very impressive dynamic woman who runs the Southern Poverty Law Center in Jackson, Mississippi. And then me, we were the only speakers. So it ended up being a really big deal. And they also selected us for the Need a Nudge Award by their sponsor, Toyota. So Mob United is getting $5,000 as a result of this experience. So it's just been an unexpected, incredible blessing. And I was so glad it all worked out for me to be there, because I would have missed a really special night. So I wanted to share that. I also wanted to share, if you haven't seen already, that we are now actually searching for our first ever full-time employee for Mob United, an executive director. We've been doing this since July 2016, all volunteers, grinded it out, trying to keep the organization going and grow and build, but we really need someone to take the helm who can turn this into a sustainable long-term organization for impact. Our mission is still very relevant today and still very much needed. So the search is on. DRG search firm is handling it. They've received more than 250 applications for this job, which is, they said, very good and somewhat unusual for an organization, of our size, and for the first time having an executive director. So if you know anyone, or you think you are that someone who should take the helm and lead this organization to the future, please go to DRG's website and apply, and encourage others to do so. They're vetting candidates right now. So I just wanted to share that before we start. And now I'm very excited to introduce our guest speaker for the morning, Pam Keith. And I will just tell you a little bit about her. She has a very extensive bio, but most recently, she started an organization called the Center for Employment Justice in Washington, D.C. And she will tell you what that means, because there's a whole premise behind it that I find so fascinating. She's also the lead counsel for the first ever class action lawsuit for a group of Black women police officers in DC who are suing for discrimination, and really focused on trying to change the culture of policing from the inside out. So I feel like we've had a lot of conversations about policing since we started Mob United. Is kind of how we started. We started based on cases of police brutality and Black boys and men in particular being not just killed, but constantly harassed, targeted, assumed to be criminals. And then of course the cases that led to death. That's kind of how we started. And we have grown from there to focus on not just that, but also the education system, mental health system, the overall criminal justice system. But that's our origin. So policing has always been a big focus for us. We partnered with Noble in the past to host seminars and try to foster understanding that way. But I have to say, I was just prepping with Pam a few minutes ago, and I feel like this is going to be a different conversation than the kind we had before. So I'm really excited to get into it. I feel like we've had a lot of conversations about how to reform policing and what we should focus on. So Pam, you should know we focus on things like de-escalation training, mental health training, bail reform, lesser sentencing for juveniles, and things like also focusing on the accountability piece and wanting to have a database of bad officers. And I would say most of the things that were in the George Floyd Policing Act that sadly did not pass, that agenda was the agenda we've been pushing kind of since inception. And it was kind of the most comprehensive view of all the things we're advocating for. But I just want to pause there as a setup and give you a chance to introduce yourself, tell us more about your background and history, and just what you'd like to share with us today.
I don't want to speak too much about my background, Apelsa, so thank you, Sarah, for introducing me. Because I think that's, so just to give a little bare bones, I am an attorney. I started out as a U.S. Navy JAG. That was my first job out of law school. I went to law school at Boston College. And I spent, after my Navy years, I spent all of, the beginning part of my career as a labor and employment attorney in big white shoe law firms, including Jones Day here in Washington, D.C. And then I went from big firms to in-house for a large American corporation called Nextera Energy. It's the biggest producer of clean and renewable energy in the country, and it also owns several utilities. And so I did that, and that's what brought me to Florida. I lived in Florida for 11 years, and I just moved here last month back home to DC. But once I realized that I was kind of through with the sort of corporate law thing, and it just wasn't satisfying me anymore. I decided that I wanted to make a difference in a different way. And so I got into politics. I'm the first African-American woman to ever run a qualified campaign for Senate in the state of Florida. That's how I jumped into politics. I was like, go big or go home. So I ran for Senate. I overperformed expectations, but clearly was total novice to politics and how it really works. And so I got 175,000 votes on no money in a huge state, and really made an impact. And I thought, oh, well, that must mean that politics is right for me. And so I ran for Congress. And in 2020, I was the Democratic nominee for Florida's 18th congressional district. Even though I did not win, we increased turnout by 30,000 votes in this district in 2020. And we won the primary with 80% of the vote, which is unprecedented because I was not the party chosen candidate. So I have my feet in both management side thinking, because that's what I was trained on earlier, politics and policy, and the X's and O's of actually getting legislation through. And now I am the founder of the Center for Employment Justice, which is an employment law firm that represents women, minorities, and whistleblowers in the workplace. Lisa, lovely Lisa here, is one of my clients. And one of the things that launched Center for Employment Justice was this lawsuit that we filed in 2020, September of 2020, which was, I think it was 2020, or was that 2021? Maybe it was 2021. Yes, it was 2021. Sorry about that. And it was 10 Black women police officers, all of whom were long tenured, excellent police officers, coming together, the first ever class action lawsuit, talking about the misogyny and racism inside of police departments, and especially as the intersection of that for Black women. And there is something nuanced about the intersection of race and gender as Black women experience employment. And that's sort of my niche. If people were to say to me, what is Pam's niche? It's representing Black women and telling our stories and helping educate and change people's understandings of the experience of Black women in employment. So that's kind of what I do. That lawsuit opened up Pandora's box. I mean, so many people came forward, including Lisa, but so many others, and so many stories came out about the inner workings of MPD. And MPD is a big police department. It is a well-funded police department. It is one of the most diverse police departments in the country. So theoretically, it should be the least racist and the least sexist, but you'd be wrong about that. And I think it's a very good sort of test case. You know, it is a very good narrative creator for people to understand policing nationally and internationally, quite frankly. And so my experience of hearing all of these narratives from every component of policing, from the very recruiting cadets all the way through to senior management, like one of my clients who was an assistant chief of police. So this whole gamut, I have had access to people telling me all kinds of things. And how the departments work together, and all, it's just sort of the entire tapestry has come together here in DC. So because of that experience, I have started to think about policing reform in a very different way, because I think we've overcomplicated police reform by thinking that we can tell police how to behave, and we are going to create oversight over police on how they behave. And we are going to, do all these things that the police themselves will have this patina of resistance to, such that it really doesn't penetrate. And because it doesn't penetrate, those who are allied to police will actively oppose it politically, right? So if they, we need to understand that politics is everything and everything is politics. Police unions are incredibly powerful. Why are they incredibly powerful? Because they're well-funded, number one. They're some of the most well-funded unions out there, and unions play in politics, right? Unions vet candidates and support candidates and endorse candidates. And people out there look to see, well, who's the police union endorsing or supporting? Some people are going to be like, I won't vote for that person. And some people will be like, I do vote for that person. but the police unions are very effective at getting people into city and municipal leadership and state leadership that will continue to fund them at the levels that they want to be funded. And so we're misunderstanding a lot of how this game works. Whereas the police unions endorse consistently, groups like Mob, do they endorse candidates? And if not, that's something you should be thinking about. Because our community probably wants an organization to endorse candidates on policing issues, but we don't have that kind of proxy, right? So that's just, I want to leave that there to understand why the various good ideas in the George Floyd Policing Reform Act never got anywhere. They never got anywhere because they were coming into a system that is ossified and hardened in stopping that kind of thing from ever being successful. Even Black candidates in certain parts of the country, in most parts of the country, cannot afford to have their local police union coming hard against them, right? Because they bring money, and money is everything in politics. So
yeah, can you unpack that a little bit more? Like, why is there so much resistance, right? Like the goal should be public safety, safe communities. Like, why is there so much resistance to any proposals that reform?
Because much like the military, there is a sense that policing is incredibly dangerous. The streets are wild. I have to have my brother's back. We have to be for each other. It's not a job, right? It's not something you go to and you leave and you come back. You are not, when I go to my law firm or I go to my Library of Congress where I work, or I work at, Clorox, whatever, that's my job. That's not my identity. For police officers, being a police officer is an identity, much like being a military member is an identity. And because of that sort of esprit de corps and the need to face danger together, a great deal of emphasis is put on that sense of that insularity, right? That it's us against them, right? It's us against the bad guys, but how they define the bad guys varies, right? At most, it's us. We have to be together for each other. And that is drummed into them through the academy, through the streets, and a very, very strong culture is created in policing where, only police officers who can be trusted are the ones who keep our secrets. So if you don't keep our secrets, you can't be trusted. And that carries over into how you are treated on the streets. So if you're perceived as a rat, nobody's going to have your back, right?
Wow.
If you're perceived as a trouble, as a person that doesn't just let things go, then you're going to be ostracized and you're going to be isolated. And it is a type of culture where ostracizing and bullying and isolating and things that you would never countenance in a corporate setting ever, or just any.
Well, maybe. There's some rough corporate settings.
There's some, but there's something qualitatively different.
Yeah. It's a different type of bullying. But sure.
It's it is much more akin to something you would see in high school than something that you would see in a corporate setting, right? Where somebody just confronts you and gets up in your face and starts screaming at you, like that kind of thing. If you were at a corporate setting and somebody got up in your face and started literally, screaming at you in your face, like the people in the hallway would be shocked. They'd be like, "Oh my God!" Right? Like, and at MPD, it's they'll say, "Oh, stop," whatever, but they won't feel like that's something that's way beyond the pale.
Yeah. Well, let's unpack that part further. I want to get into your proposals, but first, I'm trying to understand the mindset of a police officer and the culture, because it's something, as I've been doing this work with the organization, I've been kind of shocked by some of the encounters we've had and how they describe what matters to them. I think we as the public assume that the same things that matter to us matter to them. And most of us know we're not criminals. So there's no reason to be at war with us or to approach us with this mentality of being at war. Like, do you think that perception of being us, like us versus them being the community, the people they're hired to serve and protect, has always been there? I feel like it's gotten worse over time, over decades. Like, I don't remember.
Yes.
I
It's
don't
all
remember the police being that way. Like when I was a child, maybe I was naive, but it was more like officer friendly. This is someone you go to for help. Now I'd probably never tell my sons to go to the police officers if they had an issue for help, because I don't know what the response is going to be.
it has gotten worse over time, and for a variety of reasons. But our understanding of what it is has gotten more transparent over time because of social media. So we see things we didn't see before.
Right.
The officer a-hole and officer friendly have always existed, right? But we see the videos of officer a-hole now in a way that we've not seen before, right?
Mhm.
And because those videos are going out, that sense of siege mentality has also hardened, right? The siege mentality is when you feel like you're being attacked from all sides and you hunker down, and then you start to justify anything your group is doing because there's a siege from outside. And that siege mentality is baking itself into a lot of police departments, right?
Yeah.
But if I were to say what is the police mentality, I would tell you that there's a diversity of police mentalities out there. There are people that are officer friendly types. There are people who are, I'm all about protecting and serving my community, and there are people who are all about, I'm Biff the bully and I'm here to swing my junk in the wind, right? Like it varies, but there are things that are consistent. One is that sense that I have to have my fellow officers back no matter what. Like they're mine, I am theirs, and we stick together. That is a common thread. Another common thread is nobody that doesn't have this job understands what we do or should have the right to tell us how to do it. That is a very common mindset that I went through the training. I'm the one on the streets. I know what it takes to make these streets safe. And nobody who doesn't have this job and doesn't have this experience should be telling me how to do it. Because if they don't live it, then they shouldn't tell me. That is a very, very common and I think almost universal mindset across police officers. It's why they resent oversight so much. It's why they resent transparency so much, because they feel like every encounter they have with the citizens is somehow nuanced in some specific way that others can't understand it. That's why they hate the body cameras and seeing the videos, because to them, whatever gets caught on video isn't really true because there are nuances that the rest of us don't understand. Like if I'm beating the hell out of a guy who's handcuffed, you don't understand. We had to do that because that's the situation called for that. My judgment, right? And
their judgment reigns supreme, regardless of what logic or video shows us.
I lived these streets, excuse me. I lived, you don't know how dangerous these people are. I had to do this, right? And so those two things bump up against each other. So when somebody does something outside of the pale, right? Where are the others to tell them that that's beyond the pale? Well, the mindset of I have my brother's back and he has mine prohibits, it jams up against that bullying behavior, that abusive power behavior. So they jam up, and so what happens is they don't speak out about it because one of those two things is going to dominate, and usually both. Right? Usually it's going to be, not only do you not understand policing, but I got to have my brother's back. And they work in tandem to create this environment of what I call the blue code of silence, and a lot of others do, right? Which is this, if you see something, you better keep it in-house, right? And we can police our own. And you shouldn't be telling us how to police our own. Wow. And what happens in an environment like Crucible like that is that excessively jerkish personality can thrive in that environment. That excessive and bullying, intimidating environment can thrive. First of all, it's very male dominated, and a lot of macho people go in are just naturally inclined to that kind of job. Just like
I wanted to ask you that, like the profile of the person who's even I mean, it is a dangerous job, and
it's a dangerous job.
Like what type of person, and you can't stereotype all people, but like are certain personality types more likely to choose this as a profession, and how does that impact?
Right. Well, there's certain personality types that are drawn to this career, just like there's certain personality types that are drawn to military service, right? Which is why military service tends to skew conservative. It's not entirely conservative, but it tends to skew conservative because the people drawn to that are people who are drawn to authoritarian power structures, right? People who do well in an environment where they're told what to do and they tell other people what to do, and you have to do it by sheer structure of rank. They like that. They don't want a whole lot of touchy-feely, how do you know, they don't want to work collaboratively that way, right? They want to be told what to do and they want to tell others what to do, right? And that's a very easy way to live in some ways. So there's certain personality types that are drawn to that. There's also that personality type that feels like they should be the ones regulating other people's behavior, right? There's a personality type that says, I should be the one that's controlling others. And that personality type is drawn to policing.
Because they think they're superior to others, or because they have
get to use
bias
their badge and their authority to moderate in some cases, but to dominate people who maybe they didn't feel very secure or had challenges growing up, and now they sense of the badge gives them power. Let's be honest. You could stop somebody and make their lives a misery. And there are people who get off on the idea that I now have this power. It's not that I want to serve them, it's that I want to control them. And we see that in videos all over the place too, right? How that manifests itself. But before it manifests itself on the street, it manifests itself in the police station, right? It manifests that tendency to abuse power manifests itself inside the police before it manifests itself outside the police. And so that's kind of how I came to understand that we are approaching policing reform the completely wrong way. I came to understand that by starting to understand how police interact with each other and what incentivizes them within the four corners of their lives. Right?
Okay.
And
I guess that's a good segue to get into it. Like, you've told us what we're doing wrong, that they're not going to listen to outside perspectives. They don't really care what we think. They don't think we know what we're talking about because we don't do this job. We don't understand what they go through. We don't understand how dangerous it is. So any new proposals coming from the outside, they just automatically discount, ignore, fight against.
Exactly.
So what is your proposal to change it from the inside?
I want to take it back to the most basic fundamentals of what motivates people and what curbs behavior, right? If you have a child, and all of you are mothers out there, you know what motivates your son or your daughter to do well and what disincentivizes them to do well, and what motivates them to do badly, right? Or to do wrong, and what disincentivizes. And so we've gotten way too complicated about all of this, right? What motivates police officers is stability of their job, promotion, and most especially retirement benefits. Police, and this is something that a lot of people don't put a lot of thought into, but you need to understand how important it is. Police officers, firefighters are probably some of the few people who still have defined benefit pension plans. Most of us out here have what we call defined contribution plans, meaning we put into our 401k, or even our employers put into a 401k, and our retirement benefit is going to be some factor of what we've put into it. Defined benefit pension plans are based on seniority, right? And once you hit your 20 years or your 25 years, whatever your vesting number is, you are entitled to benefit for the rest of your life, however long that is. That is not predicated on how much money you put into this thing. The municipality picks up the cost for your retirement for the rest of your life.
Is that pretty standard nationwide? Is that by jurisdiction? Okay.
Excuse me, I have a little bit of a remnant of a head cold. So military benefits are like that, right? If you do your 20 in the military, you're going to get your military retirement for the rest of your natural life. And that doesn't ever run out because the taxpayers pick up the tab, whatever that is. The same thing with military medical benefits for the rest of your natural life, however much that costs. That is an extremely expensive thing, right? And so police officers are incredibly incentivized to hang in there to get their pension, right? That's a very strong motivation for them. Number two is that there are some that want to promote. And from the ranks of officer to sergeant to lieutenant to captain, you have to test in to your promotion, right? But if you pass the test, you get promoted. Doesn't matter whether you're actually any good at managing people. You are not promoted through these ranks based on your management skill. You are promoted through these ranks based on your ability to pass the test.
What's on the test?
A variety of things like general orders, rules and regulations,
Okay.
weapons handling, but you got to study for the test. You pass the test,
Right.
you score X. This, the people who scored above X number are on the promotion register, and they just take as spots open, they just take them in sequence, right? Totally mathematical. And then you have this other component of just being tenure. Some people aren't ambitious to promotion. They're happy to be a police officer or a patrol officer for the duration of their career. There's no requirement that they promote, and they don't. But they want to be able to hang on to that job because that's a steady paycheck. That's great medical benefits. That's, days off and sick leave and retirement and vacation. It's like it's good, and it's a good pay. It's a good paycheck for a lot of folks that wouldn't find nearly be so well compensated if they were in the private industry. So those are the incentives. So the question is, to what extent is your tenure, your promotability, and your pension tied to positive, good behavior? The answer is not at all. Not at all, because you can stay and be a jerk. And we've seen people be put back to work over and over and over again when they have been engaging with the community in a really negative way, which is a whole nother issue about the disciplinary process. We can have a whole conversation about what's wrong with that. You don't have to be good to the community to get promoted. You just have to pass the test, right? And if you hang around long enough, you're going to get your pension. But if you start to put some good behavior parameters on both being able to stay, to promote, and to get your pension, then that good behavior incentive is going to become something they think about. So I came up with this idea on how to make this happen. Solutions, because we need solutions.
Absolutely.
So my idea is this. If you remember, some of you are old enough like me to remember that back in elementary school, when you had both your academic grades and you had your citizenship grades. Your citizenship grades was based on your attendance, tardiness, and listening in class and not being a jerk, right? But let's say we create what I call a citizenship score for police officers. And the way we would do this is that either at OHR or some other outside organization, even private, I don't care, all year round would be sending police officers emails asking them to rate a fellow police officer. And throughout the year, it will be different rates, right? Like different officers. And it'll be based on somebody you did an overtime assignment with, somebody you were in a training with, somebody, right? But as long as they have a record that you interacted with such and such an officer, you will get an email that says, and it's completely random as to who gets the emails and about whom. So nobody knows. Nobody knows you got this email. Nobody knows you filled it out, but you have to fill it out and ask 5 questions, right? Was this officer courteous? Was this officer professional? Did this officer abide by rules and regulations to the best of your knowledge? Did this anything that you feel was inappropriate? Would you be willing to work with this officer again? That would be, and to do this effectively, you have to be having those ratings going out to everybody all year round, so that nobody knows when their fellow officer is asked about their behavior. And they don't know who is being asked about from, when. So you are always on guard. You always thinking like, I better not be a bully. I better not be unprofessional. I better not be playing willy-nilly with the rules because somebody could call me out. Now, granted, and if you're taking that information and you're getting that information, multiple reviews over multiple people, you start to get database numbers, and you can start to crunch those numbers. And you will start to get a number. You will get a number for your citizenship for the year. You throw out the highest, you throw out the lowest, and you get a mean of what this officer is like this year. And over time, you're going to start to see a pattern. You get a cutoff, if you're above 70, that means you're a good guy and a good gal, and people like working with you. And if you're below a certain number, that means that people think you're a jerk. Right? Not one person, the body of people asked about you think you're a jerk. And that cutoff can start to create. So if you get The first time you get below the cutoff, you just get a notice. Notice you were below the cutoff. The second time you get below the cutoff, you get counseling. We are counseling you that this is the second year that you have been below the cutoff and how you treat people. The third year, you will get intensive coaching, right? Intensive, how to talk to people, how, help you, training. By the fourth year, if you get below that cutoff, you're out. And the beautiful thing about that is that you start to know, an officer starts to know that they have to be above this citizen cutoff to remain in the job. And then you up it a bit. So this is what you need to stay. Then you up and say, this is what you need to be promoted. No matter what you do on the test, you have to have this citizenship grade to be promoted. So now you don't just have to be decent, you actually have to be kind. And you have to stay in the either decent or kind level. And as you get to senior leadership, you should have to be outstanding. You are not eligible for senior management unless you have even higher than kind. And so what happens over 10, 20 years is you start to weed out all the people who cannot be decent, and you have people in management who are outstanding. And that will incentivize and change behavior.
I have a lot of thoughts and two immediate questions that come to mind. One is based on like how you describe the culture of policing and how entrenched it is. Like I have my fellow officers back. Do you think people will be honest? I know it's anonymous, but you could also see a situation where people go around saying, I'm going to get this thing about you, you're going to get about me, just, check yes, of course.
They don't know who's being asked. And it's not just officers who get asked.
That was part two. So my other question is there a way to broaden the questionnaire beyond fellow officers? Is there any community component of like the people they're interacting with weighing in?
So within the structure of the organization, response is mandatory. With respect to engagement with civilians, response can't be mandatory, but you can add in random hits to the community. You interacted with officer so-and-so. How was your interaction? And this is important, and Lisa will tell you this, there is a very strong divide in the police department between sworn officers and civilians. And sworn officers are treated as far more important than the civilians are. So there is a great deal of abuse and disrespect and unkindness to the civilian employees. So these ratings are going to be from the cadet that you ran into, the filing clerk that you talked to, the training officer that you were in with, the person that you did overtime with. It's not just going to be the buddies that you can influence to score you well. There can't be a pack. You can't have a pack with everybody, right? And so that's why you get a real 360 about this person. You get a 360 because it's year round. It's all kinds of different interactions, right? And it's completely anonymous. There's no way to find out who said what. One of the reasons that people have the Blue Code of Silence works so much is because everybody knows what everybody says and does. But if they don't know, if there is true randomness and true confidentiality, true secrecy, then you're going to get the truth. And what you're going to find is that over time, the same people who score badly are going to continue to score badly. Because if they could be nicer, they would. And you will weed out the ones who are being influenced to being abusive by their peers and can be disincentivized, and the ones who are just hardwired to be jerks.
Yeah.
And the thing is, it's not racial, it's not gender, it's not age, right? It's not what your boss thinks, it's not cliques. It is a true randomized 360 analysis of this person over a consistent period of time. And that's how
yeah, I mean, I really appreciate your approach. I'm going to make a comment, and I want to invite Lisa to share your thoughts, like as a officer who's been a part of this culture, like just any thoughts you have on how you think this would work or what you experienced. I didn't ask you to do this, so I'm kind of putting you on the spot, but I'm going to talk in between. So I just, I think it's interesting because I think this applies to any workplace. Like when I think about all of the environments I've worked in, corporate, for profit, nonprofit, whatever it is, the issue is always what behaviors are rewarded, what behaviors are punished, and what are the consequences. No, I've never worked in a culture that is as extreme in terms of the bullying you described in policing, but there's certainly lots of issues around who's a good manager, how they treat people, how much does that matter if they're delivering results, especially if they're financial metrics. There are many instances where people are rewarded, promoted over and over again for delivering business and financial results, but it doesn't matter how they treat people. It doesn't matter if there is bullying, there is yelling at people sometimes. It often doesn't matter. Those things are starting to change. We've also looked at how do you measure a commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion? How do you make that a part of someone's annual evaluation and compensation? So I think you bring a very unique perspective and lens, like from your experience as an employment attorney, because that I have this conversation all the time, like more often than you would think. Like that is what matters. What's rewarded, what's punished, what are the consequences? And if you don't have consequences, even if you have it all written down on a rubric on what people are being measured on, if ultimately, like you said, and maybe 3 years might be too long, depending on what these behaviors are. But if there are no clear consequences for your behavior, people don't care. Like, I think you're absolutely right. I think it's unfortunate. I think in this case, it's unfortunate because I think we all assume that police officers think of themselves as public servants. And like we have this, I don't even know where the line that they're there to serve and protect the community came from, but I think we all have that seared into our brains that their role is to serve and protect the community. They're taking like an oath that they're going to do that, and there's some higher moral, North Star guidance that they're following. They're here to protect and serve. Like we all think of them as protect and serve, but at the end of the day, like you said, this is a job, and they're people, and they're trying to preserve their own self-interest and benefits and all these things. So I think it's a very fresh approach, and I appreciate you putting it forward. I want to come back to ask how's it going? Like, who have you proposed this to, and how's it going? But first, Lisa, any thoughts?
Well, I'm actually looking at Kamari's question about what about the officers who get promoted that have all kinds of community complaints? That's very valid because that does happen. There's a certain cliquish culture that occurs, and they will know and have known about complaints, and these certain people will still go up the ranks, and so that's a problem. I mean, I don't know exactly how we eradicate that problem, but that's definitely something that is still at the forefront. You mentioned DE&I. Since we all started working on this over the last year and a half, interestingly, NPD just hired their first diversity, equity, and inclusion chief, right? To talk about these things. And she's been doing this voices tour to get everybody's report card, kind of like what Pam is saying, right? So I wonder if now, if they're really going to do that, I'm wondering how we get everyone to the table. Because like I think you said last year, Pam, we're not taking scalps, right? We're trying to get these people to the table to make the change and implement the things that are going to help proactively change the culture and build the bridges in the community that they say they're building or that we're trying to build, right? So now we have this DEI chief equity person there. I'm interested to see if they're now going to collaborate with all these stakeholders and people that are involved and want to be. And even when we did the DePelson, when we did the chats with the chief, when you talked to Chief Conti the one time and we started the chats with the chief, that was a community thing with Howard University where we were talking to the community. So the conversations have started over the last 18 months, 2 years or whatever. So now we just, how do we push it forward now and hold the people accountable and say that, no, this particular behavior cannot be ignored. You can't just sweep it and keep that same person in that same position when they violated the public trust or had bad behavior or uses of force and things of that nature. So there's a lot to unpack there, I know, but.
Well, and to sort of flesh this out a little bit, if you do have an abusive force issue, that would dramatically drop your grade, right? So you'd have to be really good to stay on. I think the point of this is that over a period of time, cadets coming into the police academy will understand that their promotability, their retention, and their pension is going to be dependent on keeping a good citizenship score, right? And once they start thinking that way, They know they can't mouth off to the community because that person may get a survey. They know they cannot intimidate their fellow officer because that person may get a survey. They know that they cannot, use racial slurs and sexist language because that person may get a survey. And that motivator starts to implant. And once it implants, it starts changing the culture, right? Because they know they're not able to ask who got the email or not. And then people could lie, so they don't know, right? And it's that randomness, it's that consistency, and it's that set expectation. Like, because people at MPD, one of the things about MPD and just all police departments, and in fact, all employers really, is that people in power can favor those who enable them and those who support them, and they have their favorites. MPD is a bastion of favoritism, right? And so one of the few things they have is that promotion through the captain rank is mathematical, right? It's on this, you're on this list, you're supposed to be promoted. There are many little nuances to that as to who actually gets promoted, right? But if it's taken out of MPD's hands, that if you score 4, below this over 4 years, you're gone, then nobody can protect you from your own jerkishness. Right? If it's mathematical that you have to have this score to be promoted into leadership, the chief can't dance around that. There's nothing, and since it's outside of the police department, he can't manipulate it. She can't dance around it. That creates a situation where only those who are best at being with others, that are good at, they have to be technically good. I'm not saying it's a supplanting the technical side or the experiential side. It's adding a component that you have to be good technically, good experience, and be good with people, or you're not going to get into management. And so once you start to get that symbiotic relationship between people being incentivized as they go through the ranks and only the best making it into management, then you have completely shifted the culture of the place.
Yeah, I get it. And it's a long term, it's a process, right? It's not something that happens overnight. I was just thinking, in New York, we have something called the Civilian Complaint Review Board, which is a separate body that people can go to make complaints against officers if they have negative encounters. And there's a whole process where they vet it, they investigate it outside of the department, and then they make a recommendation on what should happen. Do other cities, is that a common model? And could that also be an input to the survey, as opposed to hoping you get the random survey if you had a bad encounter,
Right.
like you have this place you can go, and that could factor into the score?
Yes, that can factor into the score if you got a complaint. But I think what's important about that is that process is about terminations or not terminations or serious discipline. And it doesn't necessarily, like I said, I don't think that actually penetrates to change behavior. Because again, it's an outside force telling you you're no good, and most of the officers just be like, whatever. Again, it's a component, right? It's a component.
Right. Most of the time they don't end up recommending termination.
Right. And not only that, but most civilian review boards don't have the power to terminate, right? They can only make recommendations.
Right, they make recommendations.
Right. So again, what I'm trying to do is change the input of what officers think about on a day-to-day basis. How do you rewire their thinking about their job? And the way to rewire their thinking about their job is for them to be focused all the time on this number that they have to hit to promote. They have to hit this number. So now they're thinking, oh my God, I have to hit this number, right? If they ever have like if you're a person who was cool, and then you had a year where you dipped below, you would be all in your head about getting back up, right? You'd be all like, oh, I got to get back up. So all of a sudden you start to think about, I need to make sure that I'm respectful to everybody. I need to make sure that I'm speaking right to everybody. I need to be professional and not be breaking rules. I need to be right, like because you don't know, right? 1 year dip is not going to be the end of your career. It's that pattern over time, that longitudinal view. And if a person is cut off from MPD because over 4 years they were not able to get to decent, they shouldn't be in policing anywhere. So
have you presented this proposal to anyone, and how's it been received?
I talked to USA Today and some other media outlets about it, and everybody who's heard this idea loves this idea. I've not had anybody come back and say, nah, that won't work. I've had people come back and say, no, the police won't like it. That's true.
Right. Yeah. That's what
but
I'm, how do you get it adopted, especially since it has to be embraced by them? Like, what is the forcing mechanism that makes this become reality?
Well, first and foremost, you got to get your city council to embrace it. This is I'm a labor lawyer. Police union's not going to like it. Even police management's not going to like it. But this is entirely something in the purview of management. And management is controlled by the civilian leadership of the city, be it the mayor or be it the city council. So they don't have to like it, right? Like if you this is not a mandatory subject of bargaining until such time as it involves discipline. Right? If it's just, this is part of your job, just like your uniform is not a mandatory subject of bargaining. Why? Because that management gets to decide that. Body worn cameras was not a mandatory subject of bargaining. What was mandatory is what happens to you if you don't turn it on or whatever, blah, blah, blah. That's disciplinary. If it's not a mandatory subject of bargaining, they don't have to like it. Right? If you implement it, you're going to get resistance for the first year, 2 years, 3 years. But over time, those cadets coming in that get trained on the system are going to work their way into the ranks, and their mindset's going to be, got to hit that number, got to hit that number, got to hit that number. Mm-hmm. And that culture will change, whether they like it or not. They don't have to like it. We want their input. We want their buy-in. But people will age out of the system. And there will be a little grace period for people to get used to it. But you should already be decent to your fellow officers. And if it's a stretch for you to be decent to your fellow officers, then we got a problem.
Lisa, did you want to say something?
No, I mean, the unity is the key, right? I mean, if we're divided, we're not going to make the progress that we need to make. And I think at the end of the day, if we all really want this transparency and this accountability, then we have to find a way to push the kick the can forward, right? And get the right people at the table. And sometimes, we got to get them to the table, motivate them. And I think that Pam is, when she's talking about the pension, or when it starts to hit these bad actors or these bad players in their own pocket, it then definitely gets their attention, keeps their attention, and then forces people to say, okay, you know what, we need to sit down and have this conversation. I mean, we can't always keep talking about police for tomorrow and building bridges, and we never come to the table and sit down and then map out the plan to make it happen. So now I would just like to see, like in the short term, Pam, what do we do in the short term? Like everything you're saying is great, ideally, if we can get it in there and get it going, right? So let's say it took, I don't even know how many years MPD been around before they even got a DE&I person, right? And I would like to say that has happened because of all the courageous women that have been in their ear and on their back, because we just had that. And so, yes, now we have her, but now what's going to happen next? What can we do in the short term to hold them accountable and make sure that it's not just talk, but they're walking it?
Right. And I think one of the things is that we need to continue to push management to get rid of people. See, that's one of the problems that we have, is that in our complaint, in your complaint, and several other complaints, very specific people came up over and over and over again as being abusive. And those people are still in power. Because one of the things about management of this blue code of silence and this sort of I got your back is that any external person accusing somebody of doing wrong causes management to harden to protect them. Instead of saying, hey, where there's smoke, there's fire. I mean, we named the director of the EEO department of MPD as being completely corrupted, out of the box crazy. And every employee who worked for him was a litigant against him in this suit. Every person who worked for him said that he told people to manipulate investigations to deny claims of sexual harassment, gender discrimination, and race discrimination. And he's still there. In Lisa's case, 3 different Black women accused and head of internal affairs of corruption, racism, bias, and gender discrimination. He's still there, right? So in the short term, don't talk about DE&I. If you are not going to believe people when they're saying that we have a consistent problem with this person, and then actually say, okay, we're going to do something about it and remove that person. If you're not going to remove anybody, if you're not going to actually take action to take them out of power. Even if you don't take them out of MPD, you can take them out of positions in which they harm people.
Right. So let's talk about the lawsuit a little bit, because the audience may not know what we're talking about. So just for framing, whatever you can share, understanding that it's ongoing, like tell us about the lawsuit. Have to say Lisa, who is our DC chapter lead, is one of the.
She's all right. So there's actually 4 lawsuits, right?
Okay. Well, you can break it down for us.
The first one was the class action. That is on behalf of all Black women police officers who have served at MPD in the last 10 years. There are 10 class representative plaintiffs, and they are all Black women who have been either all the way through the ranks, right? So we have one that was fairly junior, one that's very senior. We had management and level and patrol officer level, all of these different areas. And it alleges systematic race discrimination and gender discrimination in assignments, in promotion, in discipline, in failure. And one of the key things that really brought out was how Black women are not believed, and their pain does not matter. They're told and made to shut up and just take it. And this is just the way it is, and not to complain. And if they do complain, they become problem children, and then they get bullied and harassed out. It is a systematic thing. I call it code red. That's my term. But once management decides that you are no longer valuable here, even if you haven't done anything wrong, they will ride you relentlessly and fabricate things and sick IAD on you. And so then you are literally attacked on all sides until you either quit, you get fired, or you have a mental breakdown, right? And this all hands on tech bullying process is a cultural thing at MPD. It is accepted, it is tolerated, it is driven from on high, right? And everybody knows it's happening, right? They even have a term for it, like somebody's hot, that's so, don't hang around so they're hot, which is just another way of saying don't hang around that person because they're the target of systematic bullying, and you may get caught up in what management is trying to do to them. So just stay away from
Wow.
Oh, that'd be me.
right? So that, and it's systematic. It's everything you do is now wrong. Every report you write now has to be redone 5 times. Every shit you put in for leave or sick leave is denied, or every shift change you want is denied. Everybody gets what they want but you. And this is happening. And while it's happening, you complain about it. And the people you complain to are their role is to tell you it doesn't matter, you're making it up, or they can't validate it. So you have nowhere to go. It is one of the most, it is a type of mental torture, in my opinion. And it is so morally bankrupt, but it is so, and so when somebody like me from the outside tells somebody like Chief Conti, you're doing this, the people in your department are doing this, you should never do this, this is wrong. His attitude is, you don't know policing, Pam. You don't know how to run a department. You don't know what we're up against. And we come up against that factor 1.
No matter what the topic is, that's the answer.
Yeah, I think Pam, you said there's 4. Did you go through all 4?
All right, so that was the first one. The second one was about the cadets. We had 3 cadets who got the code red treatment because they participated in an investigation of a sergeant who was serving alcohol to minors, right? And they participated in that investigation. And of course, IAD showed their written statements to the sergeant that controlled them. So she just, boom.
Wow.
All 3 of them pushed out. That was the second case. The third case was Lisa's case, the IAD case, where an IAD department that had 10 Black women, a new boss came up. By 2 years later, all but 2 are gone, right? He created basically what I call apartheid inside the IAD, right?
Can you just say what IED stands for? People might know.
Internal Affairs Department.
Mhm.
So all the Black people were pushed to like gun background checks and things like that, all the Black people, and he created this sort of cadre of white male loyalists around him, and they were the ones that were doing all the major investigations and all of the major. And so what happened was you started to see these major disparities in discipline to the rank and file Black officers getting the book thrown at them, and white officers getting pats on the, getting, whatever, right? And so one of the key examples of that was Officer Carson, who was a co-plaintiff with Lisa, who got pushed out because she complained about being mistreated because she needed FMLA for her daughter who had leukemia. And then she was involved in an investigation of a white officer who falsely arrested a young black man. This should matter to everybody. He lied. The young black man was an observer of another person getting arrested, and the officer didn't like that he was there. He tried to get
and grabbed him by the neck. Don't forget that part.
Well, yeah, right. I'm getting there, right? So he tries to get this young black man to aggress on him, and this young black dude is skinny, tiny little guy. He ain't doing that. He ain't aggressing on no police officer. So the police officer grabs him by the neck and accuses him of assaulting a police officer. So that's the first thing he does. He says assaulting a police officer. Then he changes the story to resisting arrest. Then he says that the young man pushed him. The body-worn camera proves that none of that happened. The young black man was like this the whole time. He didn't touch, he didn't move, he didn't step, he didn't do nothing. What he did was not follow, not kowtow to whatever the officer wanted him to do. And he was just standing there. He was on public land. He was just standing there. He wasn't obstructing anything. He was just standing there. But this was Officer Mick, power abuser, who had multiple issues of abuse of power in the past. He arrests this guy. He puts him in the system. The district attorney goes, "What the hell is this?" They no process him. They just send him back home. No arrest, nothing, right? But he's already been liberty rights taken, already been fingerprinted and all of that. And the officer obviously not only does all of this false arrest stuff, but then he lies all over the place about what happened, which is false official statements, which are very serious problems, right? That's a very serious transgression. He gets all of this. Felicia says he needs to go to trial review board to be ousted, and she puts two claims: false statements and not following process and procedure and taking this guy into custody. Mm-hmm. Her boss, the person who all of them were complaining about, steps in and starts rewriting it to add all these charges. And you're like, well, why would you add all these charges? Because he had an intention to get this white guy back to work. And what he did was he put in all these charges, then he goes to the union and negotiates out of the charge, the two things that would get him fired, leaves a bunch of little petty things, gives him a suspension and puts him back to work.
Oh, so he added additional things that were lesser charges. So
in order to be able to give them room to negotiate out the stuff.
Yeah.
Right? And so in order to stop her from testifying at the trial board, because she was going to say, no, he did these things and he needs to be out, they fired her right before the trial board. Right. So
based on what?
Nothing. They just fire her. So you have, those are the three. So Lisa's case has three that are related to internal affairs. Monique was the God rest her soul. Monique was the one that was talking about the disparities or how Black women were treated in another department, and how, literally they were put in a building with rats and no AC and the ugliest, most bootleg, falling apart furniture. Just the worst conditions.
And the mold.
Right. And so that was the second case. And then the fourth case was about the EEO department at MPD. If something happens, you have to go to EEO, right? You're supposed to go to EEO. The head of EEO was, even though he's a Black guy, he was a Black guy, was completely alleged to management, completely, and had a very strong misogyny against Black women. And so every case of race discrimination, every claim of race discrimination, gender discrimination, sexual harassment, he would force the people working for him to not validate, no matter how much evidence was there that it happened. And his view was, this is, and so this next case that I'm working on is about the fallout of that as regards to sexual harassment, right? Where if your instruction to the EEO counselors is, you cannot substantiate anything unless there is an eyewitness, then what he's actually saying is you're free to sexually harass as long as you do it in private.
Right, exactly.
And that is the rule at MPD. At MPD, no claim of sexual harassment can be substantiated unless there is an eyewitness. Doesn't matter how many claims against that person there is.
Wow.
Right? So there could be 6 different women accusing one person of inappropriate behavior and sexual harassment, but unless somebody witnessed him doing it, then they don't substantiate. The problem is that means that the person who's the sexual harasser knows how to sexually harass and get away with it.
Absolutely. I mean, it could be their partner in the car, like no one else is.
They will
is there.
intentionally isolate women to sexually harass them in private.
Right.
And that is so what happens to those women who are sexually harassed? Well, they're not going to go to EEO because now they know that they're not going to be believed. So
And as of today, that's still the rule. Like that's still the case.
Absolutely. And it is totally contrary to EEO regulations. It is totally contrary to best practices. But as of today, that is still the practice, that they can only substantiate if there is an eyewitness. If it's he say, she say, then it's not substantiated.
So then my question is there anything that we, the public, as citizens can do to influence this? Like, is there any pressure we can place? Like, does it have to go through the mayor and the city council to change this? Is there any pressure we can put on the police department?
I appreciate that question because it brings us back to the beginning when I was talking about that political pressure.
Mm-hmm.
In theory, we have a strong Black female mayor in Washington, D.C., Muriel Bowser. In theory, we have a diversity council that should be caring about things like sexual harassment. But when reality is when you actually sue the city, their reflexive posture is to defend the police department, which means to deny what is happening, to denigrate the plaintiffs. Right?
Because it'll cost the city too much money to admit it.
Too much money, and they don't want to admit it. Right. So their first posture is denial. Their first posture is denial. And so that means that they're not trying to come to the table, like Lisa said, to talk to us. I started this process with 10 smart, strong Black women, experienced officers. Most had more than 20 years on the force. Only one had 5, and she was the officer of the year. Right. So everybody had like 20 years on. Instead of coming talking to us, their thing was, oh, well, that's all old. Oh, well, that happened years ago. Oh, well, that, that's not really serious, right? They're not saying we're lying. They're not saying it didn't happen. What they're saying is it doesn't matter because it happened to you. And that is one of the most disrespectful postures you can have. And while they're saying it doesn't matter because it happened to you, Black woman, Mayor Bowser's out here saying, oh, and I'm going to hire a whole bunch of new women. I'm not going to change the rule that says if you get
30 for 30, explain that. Yeah.
What is that?
The 30 for 30 initiative. That's what you're talking about, Pam?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so she comes out with this big old announcement. We're going to hire a whole bunch of more women police officers. But if they get sexually harassed, they're not going to be believed unless there's
right. They have to be in management for that to work. They have to be in power.
Right. So at the end of the day, there's this incongruity. It's all. So the politics of this starts to jam up against actual resolution, because the actual resolution means admitting you have a problem. And they're not willing to admit they have a problem. They're too busy trying to demonize the plaintiffs.
The confidentiality piece of the EEO, she's spot on. I mean, and the case is kind of all intertwined at some point, because with me, and I know most of our mobbers know the racial thing about the t-shirt and the racist things that I was dealing with.
Yeah, feel free to share more about your experience. I was going to ask you that next, whatever you're
but what happened with my thing, internal affairs, is that, I overheard some racist comments, and a white male making a jest of, he told a Black female that she had more excuses than a Black man going to jail. And then there was a racist Trump t-shirt going around the office saying, make Philadelphia great again, with a wall built around Philadelphia. And I reported those things. But when I originally reported the first racist comment that was, disparaging to Black males, I did call the EEO office. Okay. I did speak directly to Alfonso Lee. And then he directly called my captain. And then my captain directly told the target, and all hell broke loose for me 3 years. So that domino effect is really true. It's like there was no confidentiality. It shouldn't have happened that way. But once I was exposed, then going back to Agent Carson's case, when Pam was talking about he wasn't doing anything, what happened when the guy left out, because I saw the body on camera myself, the young man, the young fellow was in the path of the officer who was like 6'5" and like rock, and he said beep beep as he was going past him, and the boy said the word is excuse me, from my recollection, right? That's what started the whole interaction where he's in, grabs him by the neck. You said beep beep. The guy said, hey, the word's excuse me. And you didn't like that. And it just escalated to, that thing. And so it's a mess. Hopefully something happens to make it better, but this is how they were all intertwined. If there's no confidentiality, you have no trust. And it does become trauma. I think we've all been traumatized inside,
Absolutely.
Been there any length of time.
Right. But you think about a management's tasks, right? When that EEO complaint was filed and everybody at MPD was reading all of these complaints, it went all over the place. Everybody was reading. So now everybody at MPD knows what Alfonso Lee is up to at EEO. Who is going to talk to Alfonso Lee? So it should have been management's thinking to move him into another position to restore trust in EEO. Did management do that? No, because that would look like he did something wrong. So they did.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Pam.
So they leave him there. But they do start to, over time, try to build some buffers in there, get somebody underneath him, give him a couple other tasks, but he's still in the same role. They don't ever say, why don't we move him completely out of EEO into something completely different and have somebody completely new come into EEO and start building trust again? That would be too much like right.
I'm not sure exactly what he's doing. I know they moved EEO from underneath of Internal Affairs Bureau. They did do that as a result of all of this, I believe. I mean, they did do that. As a result,
they did do that, but he still had an EEO.
He's
right?
still there.
All of the investigations, he's still in control of all of the EEO investigations. That's ludicrous. That's crazy. Every single employee who has worked for him has accused him of this. And he's not denied that he's doing it. Why is he still at EEO? That's something that I don't understand. If I had an opportunity to speak to the new diversity, equity, and inclusion person, the first question I would ask her is, why the hell is Alfonso Lee still over EEO? That makes no sense.
Yeah. And it sounds like, based on your response to my question, like there's not much public pressure we can apply that would change it. Because as you go up the chain, people are disincentivized from addressing this because it could become too expensive.
I disagree with that analysis. I will say that we haven't built substantial enough pressure. I think pressure anything. Pressure did make changes at MPD, but was it enough pressure? And it needs to be enough pressure, sustained pressure, national pressure. It needs to be big pressure, right? Like, and so, okay, we built some pressure, we got some change, but we need more pressure to build more change, right? I am hoping that the new Attorney General coming in has a slightly different posture than the last one. I am hoping that now that the election is over, Mayor Bowser maybe has a different inclination to try to engage with this. But at the end of the day, the lawsuits are just going to keep coming because the problems keep continuing. My delight in being able to speak to this group, and thank you so much, Lisa, for suggesting this, is that if you want to know why police engage your sons the way that they do, the answer is because the policing culture not only allows them to do so, but protects them when they do. And if you want to see a true change in that, you're not going to be able to do it from the outside. You have to do it such that you're actually changing the mentality and the mindset of the officers, how they engage with each other, how they hold each other accountable, and what motivates and incentivizes them.
That is deep. It's sobering, I will say. but it's deep. I think it's a good segue though to audience questions. So we have a few minutes for audience questions, and you just kind of teed up the first one, which
Mhm.
is from Otisa. What, regardless of officer mindset, which you just mentioned, can our sons say and do to remain safe in a police encounter?
It's hard to say.
Oh,
Because there's, scenarios. I mean, first thing saying, I'm complying. I disagree, but I'm complying. Right? That's one thing. Another thing to say is, I am not your enemy. I am not a violent offender. Right? Because part of what officers use to justify what they do is, I was afraid. I was afraid for my own safety, because
right.
the law currently doesn't require that your fear is reasonable, right? It just requires that you have fear, right? And the law allows racism to be a component of your fear. It doesn't say that if your fear is purely because of racist stereotypes, and your fear is not legitimate. It says if you have a fear, no matter how illegitimate and no matter how racist, that's fine. So your son's job is to try to make as much of a record as possible that the officer has no reason to fear. If they say, I am not going to harm you, I'm not going to aggress on you, I am not a threat to you, I am not a threat to you. If you teach your son, every time an officer comes in and says, I am not a threat to you, I am not armed, I am not a threat to you, I'm not looking to harm you, I'm going to comply, I will be compliant, I'm not a threat to you.
Just say that over and over.
Over and over again. I am
Mhm.
not threatening you, I am not going to aggress on you, I'm not going to hurt you, I'm not a threat to you.
Yeah. I think that's great advice. I've said this a lot. I think it's so unfortunate and unfair that we have to train our sons on how
Yes.
to interact with people who are supposed to be professionally trained on how to do their job. Like, often it's young men, they're not at an age where their brains are even fully developed. They're being targeted, attacked. So that raises, emotions and hormones and fear of all that could happen. And yet they have to be the ones to stay calm and rational and poised when the professional who we all thought was hired to protect and serve us is not. I just think that's such an unfair burden, but
If I
probably
had
not.
a son, that's what I would tell him. If he encounters a
Mhm.
police officer, and say, please do not, please de-escalate. I am not a threat. I am not going to aggress on you. I will comply. I'm not armed. I am not, please de-escalate. There's whatever you need to do, I will, whatever,
Right.
but I am not a threat to you. I am not a threat to you, de-escalate.
Yeah, unfortunately, as we know, DePelsia, because it's how you started the group. It didn't work for Philando, right? I mean, he was saying, okay, I have a permit, right? So,
Right.
and then so we're still dealing with, the outfall, the fallout, the trauma, I mean,
Yeah.
it's ongoing. It's ongoing. And I'm still there. And for those of us that are still working there, it's a balance every day for our mental, right? And so, because we're still there and we're caught and we need that paycheck. You got to eat, and our passion is our passion, but we still want to see the change, and we're still there. Even the ones that have left, we want to see a better day. I think we've all been saying, hey, acknowledge it, fix it, make it right, build the bridge, move forward, do the things you said you were going to do for this, reimagining the police in the right direction, right? That's
Right.
all we've been trying to do the whole time.
If we're reimagining policing, the single most important component of reimagining policing is changing the incentives around policing and inside of policing. If you change the incentives, that's how you reimagine policing.
Let me go to the next question. And you just triggered another question for me. The next question is there evidence on how to best train people / police to not act on their conscious and unconscious biases? So
there is. I mean, you go to other countries. There are countries that police are trained for 3 years before they're put on the street, right? And they're trained on mental health, and they're trained on de-escalation techniques, and they are, psychologically evaluated over and over and over again, not just one time. Like, there are a lot of things that can be done, but we have to understand that policing in this country is the progeny of slave hunting. It came from that. We didn't have organized policing in this country until, the vestiges of the Civil War. So its roots are based in protecting white people from Black people. And it takes a strong, concerted, focused effort to teach police officers that when it says protect and serve, it means everyone, and Black people are who you serve. Because a lot of people go into policing thinking that white people is who I serve, Black people is who I contain.
That is a whole tweet right there. Not tweaks. We're not doing Twitter. It's Elon Musk. But that is a mouthful. Wow.
Mouthful.
Okay. I'm trying to get the questions in. I want to ask my question. I'll go to audience questions. That's only fair. So this is from Natasha. I live in Rochester, New York, home of Daniel Prude. And if you all remember the case of Daniel Prude, he was a mentally ill man who I believe he was out in the snow and the police put a bag over his face and he died. So a little background on that, we spoke out on that case. How can we ensure that every police department has some sort of mental health experts, counselors, or social workers who can work in tandem with officers to respond when necessary? The police aren't qualified to respond when the perpetrator is having an episode and not worthy of being shot, much less killed. Incarceration/arrest is not the answer for someone who truly needs a mental health arrest. This is a major problem nationwide that's often not addressed and locally cost Daniel Prude his life. So that's the question I want to add to the question. You know, a big part of the defund the police movement is not really defund the police. It's about shifting resources to allow other bodies who are trained in things like mental health and dealing with homeless people and, you know, milder domestic incidents to respond instead of police. So that's kind of the question,
Right.
like how
Let me
much.
tell you the wrong way. The wrong way is to say, take money from the police officers and put it in something else, because that's going to run into political headwinds immediately. Police union goes in and says, hey, you are cutting heads in my union. These are people who pay dues to my union. No way am I going to agree to that. The right approach is to say, let's have a special police unit that doesn't necessarily carry weapons, but maybe some carry weapons, some don't, and are specifically trained for mental health calls. And let's put it in the union, pay them the same as police people. They are police officers, but they're mental health unit. We have K9 unit, we have harbor unit, we have mounted police on horses, we have police on motorcycles. Why can't we have a unit within the police department that is exclusively mental health, that gets paid an extra amount of money for extra training that they get? They may have to go to get a psychology degree, or maybe they have to have deep, intensive de-escalation training or whatever. But if you give them more money to be a mental health police officer, then you're going to have police officers who want to be mental health police officers. Don't put it so that the union is against it. Put it inside the police department, inside the union, so that the political headwinds don't stop you.
Got it. Okay, that is a clear perspective. A couple of more questions. It says, this is from Kamari. Thank you, Lisa, for sharing your story. You mentioned before to hit them in the pockets, and I brought this up before with Mob a few years ago. Do you think there would be a shift in the way they treat our Black boys and men in the streets and how they are harassed and killed if we all took out $1 million life insurance policies on our boys and men, and the departments had to come out of their fund and pensions to pay those policies out? I guess this is in the case of a Black boy or man being killed, if there was an insurance policy.
I am not aware of insurance working that way. I don't think, like, you would have to get a judgment against the police officer in order for the police officer to have, in order for the department to have to pay back that insurance plan.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is we're not getting judgments against police officers who do this stuff. And the reason is because the law says that their actions are justified if they're afraid. If you want to change the standard here, change the law to say that their shooting is only justified if it would be reasonable to the average police officer, not just to them. So you put a reasonable component in it, right? So a standard, that's number one. Number two, qualified immunity is something that people are talking about. We can put in, so I don't say get rid of qualified immunity completely, but we can put in a carve out.
And just explain for people who don't know what qualified immunity is.
Qualified immunity is basically something that says police officers are not liable personally for the things that they do on the job.
Mhm.
And there's a reason that you need that, because you don't want them fearful when they're out on the street that they're going to get sued for what they do, because that's going to mess up their mind and get in the way. And there are people who are completely against it. I'm not completely against it, but I believe that there should be a carve out, right? So you have qualified immunity until such time as you trespass on a key civil right. Right. So if you trespass on a civil right, then qualified immunity falls off. Right. And then you have to ask, are they liable? And then you ask the question, was it reasonable under the circumstances? Not to them, to the average officer in the same circumstances.
Mhm. Okay. I think we have time for one more question, and this one actually aligns with the question I wanted to ask, so I'll add to it. So this is from Kim. How much does where we get officers from affect how we're viewed? Untreated vets, jail guards, etc. They have their own trauma, those recruited from outside of our neighborhoods. So my question to you was going to be, is there a way to shift policing, the culture of policing, by recruiting different types of people to become police and having a different kind of screen? And what would your recommendations be around that?
Absolutely. There are some police departments that do deep vetting. There are some departments that do very little vetting, and most departments are vetting for the wrong things. Right. So they're vetting to see if you are a criminal. They're not vetting to see if you're a racist.
Mhm. That part.
Right.
So we are allowing the Proud Boys into our police departments. We are allowing the people who post, all kinds of stuff. We're not doing the kind of deep analysis as to whether this person should have a license to kill, because that's what we give our police officers when we give them a weapon, we give them
Yep.
license, and we are just banking on their training and their restraint. And training can only go so far. Personal restraint has to be a part of that. But again, Derek Chauvin kneeling on George Floyd's neck with the 5 officers standing around him watching him do it tells you the sickness is not just Derek, it's them watching him do it. It's the department that allowed him to get out, to be
Right.
the mindset to do that in the first place. So
I'm
it's
happy to say one of those officers was convicted and sentenced this week, I believe,
Yeah.
or standing
Yeah.
by and
I
watching.
saw that.
But George is still gone. And by the way,
Right.
right, but
Yeah.
that's why I'm saying all of those officers that were standing around, what caused them to stand around? The very first 2 things that I talked about. I have my fellow officers back. Nobody understands what we do and why, and they can't judge us.
Yeah, and then Karen just reminded me about the active bystandership at MPD, and that it's pushed hard, but there's still a lot of fear factor of being labeled a snitch if you do actually step up and say anything.
What is active bystandership?
It's basically if we saw Derek Chauvin and we're there, then we are encouraged to intervene and do things. However, according to the comment she put, that this pushback of fear of being labeled as a snitch, which means that the current culture of us against them will continue. Like, it's not going to change because, again, I guess it goes back to Pam's earlier point at the top. You got to get the managers changed. It's got to kind of trickle down, and you need the people from the ground up. Got to meet in the middle somewhere and really make the changes. And so they've implemented things. Like you said, we're saying the right things. We're allegedly putting the right things in place. Now, are we going to activate that?
Yeah, culture is very hard to change.
Right.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It's a long.
So the theory is, like, if Lisa saw Karen do something wrong and she reported it, what would happen in reality is everybody would know that Lisa reported it, and everybody in Lisa's unit would be like, oh, Lisa's a snitch. I don't want to be put on duty with her. I don't want to be in the car with her. And then when you go to roll call, everybody would be talking. And then as soon as Lisa comes in the room, everybody would stop talking. They would invite people to go out to drinks, and Lisa would not be invited to go out to drinks.
Yeah.
Lisa put in her leave chit. She's, she wants Thanksgiving off, and she'll work on Christmas. She wants Thanksgiving off. They'll make her work on Christmas, and, they'll work on Thanksgiving and have Christmas off. They'll do the exact opposite. They'll make her take the worst patrol part of the neighborhood. Instead of rotating it around to everybody having to do their fair share, it'll always go to Lisa. And when she complains about how she's being treated, then they know to escalate, right? Then they'll try to investigate her, say somebody will accuse her of something, even if it's completely fictitious, she'll be under investigation for a year, so she can't get promoted, she can't get overtime, right? So that's how it happens. If Chief Conti came in and talked to the unit and said, yesterday, Karen so-and-so was accused of something, and Lisa reported something that she saw. One thing we are absolutely not going to tolerate is isolating and treating Lisa wrong because she did the exact right thing, and that's what you should have been doing. So I'm going to be watching this unit to make sure that Lisa's treated right. That being a good police officer is reporting when things go wrong, right? Conti would never say that. Conti has never said that. No one ever says that. Nobody ever does that. When somebody says, I'm being targeted, I'm being isolated, I'm being bullied by my fellow officers, nobody ever says, that's wrong. And it's because no management person ever comes in to say that that is wrong. It is why it happens continuously.
So we are officially out of time, but I want to give you Pam the opportunity. First of all, thank you. This has been such a thought-provoking, interesting, and fresh conversation. Like, as I said, we've been talking about policing and how to reform it and all of the proposals on the table for almost 7 years now, but we've never had a conversation quite like this. So just thank you for your innovation and creativity and unique thinking. We need all kinds of ideas on the table to try to fix this. And I think yours is very thought-provoking and solid. Any closing thoughts you want to leave us with? Let's try to end on a high note. And thank you.
Well, first you started this meeting by talking about the advances of your organization, how it has endured, survived, grown, and thrived, and continues to thrive. And my parting thought to you is, please think about the next step being a bigger political player. That is what Moms Demand is. Moms Demand became a political player because it endorsed candidates, it gave money to candidates, it translated what it was demanding into political action. And my prayer and my hope for you is that MOB becomes Moms Demand on steroids, that it becomes a political mover, an endorser, a financial supporter of candidates, because it's the entities that give money to politicians that get the politicians' attention when the bills come up. And you should be able to say candidate so-and-so is a MOB candidate, because it will matter to a lot of people that person is. And so that is my parting thought for you, is as you continue to strengthen and grow this organization, think about building into your political influence.
Thank you. That's great. I'll be sure to discuss that with the executive director candidates who will be interviewing soon. as the next phase of the organization. We have not endorsed candidates to date. We do have a 501c3C4, which is technically able to do so, but it's tricky on how to navigate that. But I think for the next chapter of the organization is certainly something to consider. So thank you. And thank you everyone for joining and for all the great questions. We really appreciate your support and look forward to seeing you again next month. Thanks, and enjoy the rest of your weekend, everyone.
Yeah, take care.
Take care, Lisa.
Bye-bye.
Bye.